Hello and welcome to day 6 of my Vlogmas. Today I'm talking all about Scrappy blankets, ways to use up leftover bits of Advent yarn or other yarn in your stash. Today I'm wearing the Winter Soul sweater by Jennifer Steingast, and this is in Barrett Wool Co. This sweater's a couple years old. It's held up really well. It's lightweight, it's warm. I do wish I had knit the yoke with a slightly looser gauge. I feel like it can be a little bit stiff through here, but honestly, like, it's super cozy and warm, and I've left it for a long time. I'm gonna try to do this as quickly as I can. I've tried to record this a couple of times, and I know between the dogs and the baby, like, it's been a little tricky today, but we're gonna try to do this. So my first blanket is my Advent stripey blanket. This first one is Herbs Flat Regina. I don't know if she dyes yarn anymore. And it was a 10-gram mini, my first Advent calendar, and decided to make a granny stripe blanket out of it. From here, I might use an F5 hook tulip. I don't find that brand makes a big difference for me anyway for granny stripes, but I do like the cozy handle on this type of hook. But anyway, so all of my leftovers from projects go into here, or will eventually. So what I like to do is when I finish a sweater or socks or a shawl with the Advent skeins is I will wind up all the leftovers into these little balls of yarn, and I go until it's too uncomfortable to hold. And so I have all of these wonderful balls of yarn in my bag. Should put them in a bowl and display them. I might pull this out in January. I feel like the cool tones and the icy tones with the mohair will look really pretty and be kind of really inviting and cozy. So I have all these different leftovers from many years past of Advent stitching. These are dandelion and dogwood. Anyway, so all of these beautiful skeins are held with some drops alpaca brushed silk, and in this creamy ecru colorway. And anyway, so that's my first project. It's super cozy. I pull that one back out and work on it. My other project that I work on during this time of year is my leftover Christmas yarn blanket. So anytime I finish a pair of Christmas socks, or if I acquire any Christmas minis, I put them into this blanket. And so I've got West Yorkshire spinners, there's German hand-dyed yarn, there's hedgehog, cozy knitter, all kinds of different Christmas themed yarns. And I have a whole little selection of leftovers. So like my German commercial sock yarns, I have some of my 24-gram minis. I think this is yarn jar. And I have 2 balls of just mini skeins and leftovers. So my plan, because this is very bright and very loud, and I'm imagining that the entire width of the blanket, just like that, would be maybe a little overwhelming. So I want to take some of this yarn, and this is Knit Picks Imagination from like 17 or 18 years ago at some of like my original sock yarn stash. And I want to put some of this in between, just a little narrow stripe, just to kind of break up the crazy stripes. And I feel like that will add some balance to the overall project. It's going to take me many years to finish, but that is my second project. My next project is one that I'm using leftover sock yarn for. When I moved back to Oregon, I had a whole bunch of sock yarn skeins in my stash that I knit up while I was waiting for the house to close and while the move was going on, and I put all of those leftovers in this blanket. It's just a simple granny stripe. Noticing a theme of the kinds of blankets I like to make. I think originally I was going to make like the hydrangea pattern on her website, and I did 2 rows and decided no thank you, and to switch back to granny stripe. So this one I just plan on using leftovers just in a nice natural color palette. I try to start another granny stripe blanket at some point. I don't know that I'll continue this one, but the yarn is here. My next project is from an Advent calendar from a couple years ago, Dandelion and Dogwood. I tried to make the pixelated pullover, and I was like, I don't need to make a gauge swatch. That's a big mistake. The gauge of the fabric was so tight because it was held double, and it was way too small and way too stiff, and it would never have worked. So I ended up having to rip all of that out, and I had a lot of short ends and bits and bobs. So I decided to just wind it up into like a magic cake, and I made the start of a giant granny stripe. I guess it wouldn't technically be a granny stripe. A garter swish is what I mean to say. A garter swish blanket. And I'm using just a simple I-cord edging. And I'm holding 3 strands of sock yarn with 1 strand of a fuzzy mohair type yarn to make this. And this is the full skein from the Dandelion and Dogwood Advent from a couple years ago. I think it was her rose theme. And I have some of this mohair yarn, and then just a selection of mini skeins. And I think this is on a size 10 needle. So just quick, it's easy, it's mindless, nice garter squish. I need to get back to this. I see it fading within different colors, pinks and purples, and to use up that section of my stash. Maybe even creams would be nice. Here's another blanket. This one is going to be frogged, and I'll use the yarn on that blanket I just showed you. So this one I originally started because I bought a pair of Signature Needle Arts single point needles, and I wanted to make a blanket with them. And because it was size 6, I couldn't just use fingering weight yarn. So I ended up trying to hold different hedgehog minis with a solid gray. And while it's nice, it wasn't really the look I was going for. Mama life. Anyway, I mishmashed 2 patterns together. So this is a mishmash of the jelly roll blanket with the Bibs and Bobs blanket, both by Kay Jones with the Bakery Bears. I used her stitch pattern, just kind of combined. I think this would be really nice restarted with hand spun at some point when I have the needles free again from this other blanket I've started. Anyway, just nice, but it just wasn't something I saw myself finishing, so I will just repurpose the yarn for this. My next one is hand spun, and I was looking for some of these other Advent skeins the other day, and I couldn't remember what I did with them, and they were in here. So I believe this is Nest Fiber. This is from one of her solid Advent calendars instead of the variegated. And so the colors, as they will go, the stripes will get narrower because all of the fiber is the same, but then the rows get longer with a granny square. So this is just a simple granny square. Every so many rows, I will turn it and go the other way, and if that makes sense, and it'll keep it from getting too warped. Because if you just go around and around and around without ever turning, then sometimes you end up with kind of not quite a diamond, but it kind of it'll bias. So anyway, so that is that yarn. And here's some of the other yarn that went with that. It was a very pretty color palette. But that'll be the center of this blanket. Here is another Advent calendar yarn. This was Sweet George's Fiber Advent from a few years ago. I feel like the pinks and purples and blues will look good with this blanket. And then the nice thing about this type of granny square is that as I get farther and farther out, like some of the skeins that I have that are solid will look good because it'll only be 1 or 2 rounds, and so it'll balance out. My next project, let's do this one here, is another jelly roll, and this is all with self-striping yarn. So I think I made them a little wider than the pattern calls for, and I like it because you can see the patterns from the sock yarn. So it's almost like the socks, but in a blanket form. So to kind of keep it a little bit cohesive and from being too wild and crazy, I decided that each stripe would have a color scheme. So the first, if it was mostly gray, the second stripe, if it was mostly orange, and then this stripe will be aquas. And just random leftovers. Very fun to knit. While I'm normally a Hiya girl, I think I'm going to switch these to a Knit Pro Zing straight needle because these are very sharp on this blanket, especially because I think they're 2.5 millimeter needles. So I find that I poke my fingers a lot, which is probably why I stopped working on that project. I have a lot of yarn to go in this project. Some of these actually might turn into socks at some point, but back in the day, Opal used to have advent calendar, and so I have two. I think I was able to get it for 2 years, and so I have tons of mini skeins of commercial sock yarn. Some are just leftovers from projects I've done. Here's a nomadic yarn. Here are some. I think I got a grab bag of self-striping minis on Etsy at one point. There's another opal skein. So anyway, so I have all of these striping leftovers and striping bits, and some of them I might just turn into socks, and other ones will just go into that blanket kind of in that same color scheme. So I have this whole other bag of them. But anyhow, so that is that project. It was a lot of fun. There's another nomadic yarns, and I think sweater weather, and this is the sport base. So that one's a lot of fun to stitch on when I'm looking for something bright and cheery. I think 2 more projects to go. So the next one's another granny striped blanket, and this one is a leftover and mini skein rainbow gradient. So back a couple years ago when the Find Your Fade was all the rage, I decided to make a blanket kind of inspired by that. So what I did when I was choosing the colors is I chose like this red first, which I think is a leftover from a Dragon Horde yarn Advent. And then I pulled a mini skein that had that same color red. And then I pulled this leftover, which had the burgundy, and so on. That way it would kind of be a gentle fade. It is very huge. I don't know what I was just casting on stitches. I got so many. But anyway, it fades from the red to the orange. And then I went through my stash at the time and I made a whole gradient of all the different minis that looked like they were in the same kind of color family. And I caked them up. Honestly, I kind of want to do more yarn cakes for some of these other projects because it's such a good way to allocate the yarn for project, and it's so much easier than having little mini skeins that get tangled in bags. Anyway, so here is the orange skein. So this should have all oranges, and it should fade to this one, which goes orange to gold. And I have a whole another bag of them. The gold skein will fade to this yellow one, which fades to green. And as you can tell, like there's certain colors that I definitely tend to have more of in my stash. So those colors will become more prominent in the blanket. This one fades from the yellows into greens. And some of these, I'm not quite sure what order I'm supposed to go in for these blues, but I'll figure it out when I get to that part of the blanket. Got greens and blues. More greens. This is where I got confused with my color scheme here. I've got teals and aquas. And then like a more saturated blue to like almost like purples in the middle. And honestly, I have no idea how far all this yarn will go. I might get to the point where the blanket is plenty big. And if that's the case, I'll stop, put a border on, and then I'll restart a new blanket and continue on with the color scheme and just fade it on into the next color scheme, the next, on and on. I did not skein up pinks or purples for this because this seemed like a lot of yarn and I wasn't sure if I needed all of that yarn. But if I do end up starting a second blanket from one of these balls of yarn, I'll definitely skein up pinks and purples and go from there. So that is that one. It is being stitched with the G6 hook. So anyway, so that is a fun one to work on. I haven't worked on that one since last spring, but I'll put that back in the bag later. I'm trying to make sure I've not missed anyone. I've got one more, I think. Yes. Okay. So my last one is my most recent blanket start. I started it this last summer because the Legacy Fiber Arts podcast were doing a Scrappy blanket stitch along, and if someone just needs to say stitch along, and I'm like all there, all for it. So I decided to make this one, and it's with leftover. It's not leftovers. Sorry, got distracted. It's from Advent skeins with some leftovers mixed in. So what I did was I cast on, I think this is about 12 stitches, and I'm using in the middle of the row size 6 needles. And so I just knit a very, sorry, he's figuring out some different sounds over there. A very narrow strip, and from there, I cast on about 40 stitches, and I just knit until I ran out of yarn, and then I switched to a solid gray, went to the next skein, and I'm just repeating. I didn't want them to try to be perfect squares because I know I'm also going to be using leftovers as I work through some of my DK yarn stash. And I didn't want it to be like this odd real rectangle in the middle of the blanket. So if I have some rectangles already, in my mind, it seems like it will work out okay. So anyway, so here is what I have so far of this blanket. And then I have a bag, and in my bag I've got some of the minis that I've already caked up. And then I keep a basket with the rest of my yarn. The gray is Knit Pick Swish DK, and I wasn't sure if I had enough of this yarn to do the whole blanket, so I'm also mixing in some of this speckled Cloudborn from Craftsy a long time ago. I don't know if they still carry it or not, but I figured like that would be like a nice neutral to go with everything. And then I have a basket full of mini skeins, and they are such pretty mini skeins. Like when you actually open them up and start knitting with them, you really just see like the depth of the color and how many different shades are in there. It's really quite stunning. And then there's just a nice blend of solids, and like some of them you might think like, oh, that seems like where did this color come from? But then the genius of it is like it's mixed into the other mini skeins, so everything goes together. It's like here's that red again. So it's such a nice color palette. Anyway, so it's all those. And then I also have a couple of other random leftovers that I'll probably start rows with. That way I can start that pattern of having some shorter rectangles throughout. So anyway, so that is all of my blanket projects. Um, so I hope you enjoyed this video. And tomorrow I think I'm going to do a quick update on my Advent knitting so far this year. And I think I'll bring down some of my Advent skeins that I've opened this year and talk about some of my Advent calendars and maybe my Melly Knits Guts Club that I've been carding up, and just kind of give a quick update and pick a yarn for my second Sunday of Advent start that I want to start another pair of Christmas socks. So I will do that tomorrow. So thank you so much for watching. Thank you to everyone who has watched my videos so far and subscribed. This has been a lot of fun to create for you, and I hope you have a good rest of your Saturday, and see you tomorrow.